Today we're talking about logos, and logos is an appeal to reason. Lots of people think that it means logic, but there are some things that are close to logic that are not actually logic, but still count as reasoning. So we're going to discuss a few of those, and we're going to start with basic logic. The components of logos are twofold. There's evidence, and then there's reasoning. Evidence is the statistics, the definitions, the illustrations, the opinions, expert and lay that we come up with. Reasoning is the way that we put them together. Inductive reasoning is, if you can imagine, a regular triangle with a point on the top. So you have specific cases and you build up that reservoir of specific cases until you create, in the end, a final conclusion. Deductive is the opposite. The point of the triangle is at the bottom. So from deductive, you start with a big general universal, and then from that you can extrapolate the evidence, or you can add the specific cases. This is what formal logic looks like, and we'll delve into that in just a little bit more detail in a minute. Causal reasoning is if A, then B. So A causes B. Formal logos, again, this is deductive reasoning. You have the syllogism, and syllogism is if you've taken a logic course or a formal logic course or philosophy, you might have encountered the syllogism. It has a major premise that's some kind of universal, all men are mortal. The minor premise is a specific case, Socrates is a man, and then from those two things you can conclude, or the big C, Socrates was mortal. This is the one you've probably most likely encountered in a logic course or philosophy course. Let's try another one. Major case, all cats are mammals. Minor premise, some cats have no tails. So in conclusion, some mammals have no tails. But we don't really talk like this in real life. What we do is that we sometimes leave out one or more of those clauses. So that's called an enthymeme. And I have an example. My mom is a pretty young grandma, I guess, but she was watching my daughter, and my daughter calls my mom Grandma. And so one day she was watching my daughter, and my daughter came up to her, sat next to her on the couch, and she said, Grandmas are old, right? Major premise. And then she said, Grandma, you do know that Grandma is just another word for grandma, right? And then she walks away. Neither one are confused about what the conclusion is, and that's that my mom is old by comparison to my daughter. So even though we use formal logic in a day-to-day basis, we don't always go for the full-on syllogism. Sometimes we do an enthymeme. We have several logical fallacies that we encounter in public speaking, and these I would like you to just do away with in your speech. Let's talk about non sequitur. This is the first one. Non sequitur translates to it does not follow. So that means that sometimes things sound like logic, but they're not really. One thing does not entail the other, and sometimes they're not even in the same line of reasoning. So we have to fix our roads in America, or we're never going to be a first world country. Well, no. Those things do not follow. My favorite non sequitur joke is, question, how many surrealists does it take to change a light bulb? Answer, fish. Ba-dum-bum. Okay, so it'll come to you later. Causal fallacy. I hear this one a lot. In Latin, causal fallacy, or false cause, is called post hoc ergo propter hoc. That translates to after this, therefore, because of this. So the old adage is that don't wash your car because it's going to rain. I have another one. Every time I put on my rain boots and I take my umbrella, it rains. Therefore, all I have to do is put on my rain boots and it's going to rain. Just because one thing comes before the second thing doesn't mean that the first thing caused the second thing. Okay? So, causal fallacy. Hasty generalization. Hasty generalization has several other names. like hasty induction. My favorite is fallacy of the lonely fact, the law of small numbers, or unrepresentative samples. I could ask 3 college students whether they preferred chocolate or vanilla. Let's say they all happen to say chocolate. Then can I extrapolate that all college students prefer chocolate over vanilla? Probably not. Your sample size is too small. It's also taking one case and generalizing from that single case. Bandwagon. This one you might be familiar with from school. Uh, Bandwagon really means that everybody's doing it. It's an appeal to popularity. So, because billions of people can't be wrong, right? McDonald's famously used to have that sign that said over 65 billion or 265 billion served or whatever it was. That doesn't mean that McDonald's is a healthy alternative for your dinner. We also have heard things about social media bandwagon. And if you look at this little wagon on here, you can see that in several cases, many of you probably have 1, 2, 4, or 5 different forms of social media that you check. And if you think about it, there's been kind of a cycle of how we go to these different media. So first there was MySpace, and I don't know if any of you are old enough to have MySpace, but then MySpace sort of died and Facebook took over, and then Twitter was the next big thing, and then you had YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is. And it just seems like we all go to whatever is the most popular. Ad hominem. Ad hominem means against the man specifically. I'm going to be inclusive here and saying against the person. It's an attack on the person or their character rather than their policies or their behaviors. So with regard to the issue at hand. So there's 2 ways that we do this. Option A is you can't claim he's innocent because you're a criminal, as if his guilt or innocence somehow rests on you. Option B, I know we do this a ton. I hear it in politics all the time. I know I did it, but my opponent did it first. It's also the 6-year-old way of arguing. But he hit me. So again, it's looking for those character flaws and not addressing someone's policy issues. Misplaced authority. Sometimes we appeal to authority. We'll say Dr. So-and-so says, or head of the research council says, or whatever, but that person is not an authority on the topic that we are discussing. So for instance, this is a picture of a doctor, and I always want to know, would you let this man perform your appendectomy? And he's a doctor, but it's Dr. Phil, right? Similarly, I wouldn't let this guy sell me, guaranteed to make it grow hair cream. You have to appeal to the correct authority. Sometimes we let celebrities sell us stuff, even though that celebrity has no expertise in the area of the sales. So be careful with who you listen to.